Today, we are opening a set of sources that tell one of the most frustrating, tragic, and utterly preventable stories in modern military history: the adoption of the M16 rifle.
That's right.
You might know the M16 is the longest-serving rifle in U.S. military history. It's an iconic weapon, but its entry into service was defined by, well, bureaucratic warfare, institutional bias, and a failure so profound it cost American soldiers their lives.
That is the paradox we're unpacking for you today. The M16, initially praised as the miracle rifle because of its innovative design, became, in the hands of Vietnam troops, essentially a ticking time bomb.
Yeah.
Our sources detail exactly how a technologically superior weapon was, well, you could say, deliberately sabotaged by the very people responsible for equipping the fighting man.
Our mission, then, is to move beyond just the technical specs and really understand the motivation behind this institutional resistance. Why would a powerful organization within the military actively work to undermine their own troops' equipment? We are looking at a case where organizational pride, specifically the $500 million investment in a previous weapon, was valued more highly than the lives of those on the front line. It's stark.
To frame this, we need to understand the human cost immediately. Let's go straight to late 1967. Our sources introduce us to Marine Private Jim McGarrah, a young FNGA freaking new guy, as they were called, arriving at the military base at Phu Bai, headed for heavy fighting around a place nicknamed the Rock Pile.
McGarrah was issued his brand new Colt M16A1. He said he felt invincible. It was lightweight, futuristic, fast. But the optimism, it didn't survive his first visit to the makeshift firing range.
Yeah, that's where reality hit.
He fires the first shot, but when he pulls the trigger for the second time, there's just a click and nothing. He manually cycles the bolt, reseats the action, tries again, and still nothing. Jammed.
And this wasn't an isolated incident. The source material notes that this initial failure was a very disturbing sign and, frankly, a common fear that plagued troops. When the failures happened in training, it was unsettling. When they happened in a close-quarters firefight, well, it was lethal.
And the high cost is absolutely central to this deep dive. Scores, and perhaps hundreds, of American soldiers, both Army and Marines, were killed because they were equipped with the weapon they found unreliable, often entirely useless when their lives depended on it.
This is more than just a logistical oversight, you know. The analyst James Fallows, writing in the Atlantic Monthly back in 1981, he perfectly captured the situation, calling the machinations surrounding the M16's adoption a pure portrayal of the banality of evil.
Banality of evil, that's a heavy phrase.
It is. It wasn't necessarily malicious intent like wanting soldiers to die. It was more mundane, bureaucratic maneuvering careerism that resulted in death. The chilling part is that superiors knew. They knew the rifle would likely fail when put to the test.
That distinction, banality over malice, is incredibly important, and we need to keep coming back to it. Before we detail the sabotage, we must identify the chief antagonist here: the U.S. Army's Ordnance Corps, or OC.
Ah, the OC.
You have to understand that this powerful, highly traditional branch was responsible for research, development, and procurement of pretty much all weapons and ammunition. They held immense institutional power, and they had a very specific, deeply entrenched philosophy about what a combat rifle should be.
Exactly. They were the arbiters of tradition, you could say, and their blinkered concepts led them to subvert logic and reason. Just flat out ignore the evidence.
Okay, let's unpack this history and look at the foundation of the modern assault rifle, because the M16 wasn't the first weapon to face this exact kind of institutional roadblock. We need to go back to World War II Germany.
This is where the concept really starts. Hugo Schmeisser's Sturmgewehr, the STG-44. Before this, military doctrine recognized two main types of small arms: the powerful, accurate, long-range bolt-action rifle, like the Mauser.
Right, the classic.
And the close-quarters, high-volume submachine gun, like the MP40, which fired pistol rounds, much less range, less power.
The STG-44 was a revolutionary marriage of these two concepts. It offered rapid fire like a submachine gun, but with the effective range closer to a shoulder rifle. How Schmeisser achieved this is crucial. They used stamped metal fittings, which meant quicker, cheaper manufacture.
Which was important mid-war.
Definitely. But more importantly, they introduced the intermediate cartridge.
That intermediate cartridge is the key. It's the foundation for all modern assault rifles, including the M16 and, of course, the AK-47, instead of the powerful, full-size .30 caliber rifle round that mandated heavy recoil and a heavy weapon.
Which made automatic fire really hard to control.
Exactly. The STG-44 used a redesigned .30 caliber bullet, but with a significantly smaller powder charge. This allowed for controllable automatic fire from a lighter weapon.
It's fascinating that tradition nearly killed this concept too. Adolf Hitler initially rejected the STG-44 because he was, well, an absolute traditionalist who believed only in the long-range full-power rifle round.
Yeah, he hated the idea. He forced its development to be labeled a submachine gun, an MP, machine and pistol, just to get it produced under the radar.
But then the troops got it.
But once the troops fighting on the Eastern Front reported back, raving about the STG-44's effectiveness, Hitler did a complete 180. He immediately claimed credit, declaring it the greatest invention of the war. Its combat efficacy forced the hand of a dictator.
And that concept immediately influenced our rivals. Our source notes the widely accepted story that Soviet enlisted man Mikhail Kalashnikov allegedly copied the core STG-44 design concept, that intermediate cartridge, to create the ubiquitous AK-47.
Right, the AK. With over 100 million manufactured since 1947, it pretty much defined post-war warfare. Simple, reliable, use that intermediate cartridge concept.
So we have this perfect historical blueprint. The intermediate cartridge is superior for modern infantry combat, but military bureaucracies, especially those tied to tradition, they just hate change.
Which brings us to the disturbing American parallel. The U.S. Army's Ordnance Corps showed the exact same initial resistance to the Armalite AR-15, which became the M16 that Hitler showed to the STG-44. It's uncanny.
But the Army's obstruction came at a much higher price because they had already invested heavily in their own traditional answer, the M14 rifle.
Yeah.
This weapon was adopted in 1959, modified from the incredibly reliable and frankly beloved M1 Garand from World War II.
Oh yeah, soldiers love the Garand.
So the M14 represented the Ordnance Corps' unshakable faith in the status quo, the big, powerful .30 caliber round.
The OC was adamant. The M14 used the powerful .30 caliber 7.62 millimeter NATO round, a full power round. And like you said, they had sunk approximately $500 million into the M14's development. That's a huge sum, especially back then.
Right.
For the Ordnance Corps, admitting the M14 was wrong wasn't just admitting a technical failure, it was admitting a colossal $500 million budgetary, philosophical, and frankly professional mistake. Their reputations were tied to it.
That is the true genesis of the resistance, isn't it? When you've poured that much money and professional reputation into a project, it's not just a weapon anymore, it's an identity. It's their rifle.
Precisely. And while the M14 was reliable in semi-automatic fire, its technical flaws and the role of a modern assault rifle were immediately obvious. While it had a 20-round magazine and was fully automatic,
Which sounds good on paper.
the heavy recoil of that big 7.62 millimeter round made it, as the source notes, almost impossible to keep on target when fired on full auto. The barrel would climb so violently that it became more like an area denial weapon rather than an accurate infantry tool, just spraying bullets upwards.
In other words, the Army adopted a weapon based on logistics and tradition, but it fundamentally failed to function efficiently in the role of controllable automatic fire, which is exactly what the German and Soviet designers had recognized was needed for modern infantry combat. They had a rifle that was just too powerful for its own good in that role.
And while the OC was clinging to the past, the future of rifle technology, the small caliber, high velocity, or SCHV concept, was already well established. They knew about it.
I think we need to slow down and really explain the SCHV concept, because it's where the M16 derived its technical superiority. It wasn't just a hunch. This concept dates back to, what, 1930?
It does. Robert Kent at Aberdeen Proving Ground published an American report way back in 1930 that detailed the counterintuitive finding. A lighter, high-velocity round was just as good as, or even better than, the massive 7.62 millimeter round for infantry purposes.
And the OC just ignored it.
Pretty much. They simply ignored this research for decades, stuck to their guns, literally.
And the physics behind it are incredible. A heavy, slow-moving bullet like the 7.62 tends to pass through a target, leaving a relatively small, clean wound channel. But the SCHV round traveling at extremely high velocity.
We're talking thousands of feet per second faster.
It's inherently less stable due to its light mass. Upon impact with flesh or bone, it begins to tumble and fragment, yawing violently. This inflicts a massive and complex wound far greater than its physical size would suggest. It delivers superior lethality with significantly reduced recoil.
But despite this early scientific knowledge of the SCHV advantage, the Ordnance Corps remained steadfastly faithful to the heavy 7.62 millimeter round and their $500 million M14. This is where Eugene Stoner, the chief engineer at Armalite, steps in with the AR-15.
Stoner was a true innovator. He didn't just redesign the bullet, he redesigned the entire rifle concept. He avoided traditional heavy machine steel parts and instead used lightweight stamped aerospace materials, aluminum alloys, and plastics.
Which was radical at the time.
Totally. It was a huge break from the M14's traditional woodwork and heavy steel construction. Very futuristic looking.
And of course the caliber shift. The AR-15 used the .223 caliber bullet, or 5.56 millimeter NATO. Visually, it was the same diameter as a common .22 long rifle round, which the OC constantly mocked. They called it a poodle shooter, fit only for hunting squirrels.
Right, the ridicule was part of the pushback.
Absolutely, but the key was the cartridge. It was massive compared to a .22 LR, containing a huge powder charge, and the bullet itself had a thin jacket that was designed to aid in fragmentation upon impact. It wasn't just a .22.
It all came down to speed. The M14's 7.62 millimeter round traveled around 2,800 feet per second roughly. Stoner's lightweight .223 bullet was extremely fast at 3,200 FPS.
That's a significant jump.
Over 400 FPS faster than the M14's round, and basically double the speed of a .22 LR. That speed generated the rotational instability needed for that destructive tumbling and fragmenting effect upon impact.
The operational benefits were immediate and, frankly, overwhelming. First, the AR-15 was 2.5 pounds lighter than the M14. That's critical for an infantryman carrying it all day, every day in the jungle heat.
Huge difference. And the ammo.
Second, because the ammunition was so much lighter, smaller caliber, less brass, less powder, a soldier could carry 3 times as much ammunition for the same weight as they carried for the M14.
3 times the ammo.
Yeah.
That's a decisive logistical advantage in any kind of sustained combat. And it solved the M14's biggest problem, the recoil.
Exactly. Which meant the M16 was far easier to handle on full automatic fire. You could actually keep it on target.
The superiority was so clear that organizations outside the Army who weren't, chained to the M14 investment, they snapped it up instantly. General Curtis E. LeMay, the Air Force Chief of Staff, legendary figure.
Right, tough guy.
He saw a demonstration, apparently shot some watermelons with it, and was so impressed by its incredible hitting power that he basically bypassed the whole Army bureaucracy and ordered 80,000 AR-15s immediately for Air Force Air Base security.
Just went around them?
Yep. By 1962, the Air Force was issuing the new rifle, designated the M16, around the world. It wasn't just the Air Force either. The U.S. Secret Service adopted the M16.
That's interesting.
Our source provides that fascinating little detail. An M16 was actually in the Secret Service follow-up car in Dallas on November 22, 1963. They trusted it for protecting the president.
Wow, and internationally.
Cooper McDonald representatives demonstrated the rifle across Asia places, like the Philippines, Singapore, Thailand. These nations, seeing the logistical ease and recognizing the weapon's lightweight, was ideal for jungle fighting, and, as the source notes, perhaps better suited for smaller Asian races.
That phrasing.
Yeah. Historical phrasing aside, the point is they saw the practical benefits. They rejected the heavy M14 entirely and embraced the M16 concept. The global military community was giving the M16 a definitive thumbs up, but the U.S. Army brass remained stubbornly fixed on the M14.
That willful ignorance, that refusal to see the facts, brings us to the most infuriating section of this deep dive. The active, calculated campaign of bureaucratic sabotage led by the Ordnance Corps.
It is truly shocking when you read the details.
Yeah.
Despite simulated combat tests where the AR-15 proved exceptional, light, reliable, accurate, resistant to moisture, dirt, humidity, everything you want in Vietnam,
It ticked all the boxes.
the Army brass flatly rejected it as late as 1962. They had to justify their rejection somehow, though.
And their official evaluation was, well, let's just say it was a masterclass in dishonest reporting. They concluded the M16 was inferior in some respects to the M14 and equal to it in others, therefore claiming it wasn't enough of an improvement to justify the expense of replacement.
But this wasn't an honest assessment based on the tests.
No, not at all. An Inspector General's probe later conclusively proved that the Ordnance Corps had actively rigged the test in favor of the M14. Rigged it. This wasn't negligence. This was deliberate manipulation of evidence to protect their sunk cost and their preferred weapon.
Rigging the test is serious institutional misconduct, but it actually gets worse, doesn't it? This required intervention from the civilian leadership. Defense Secretary Robert McNamara,
Famous for his numbers-driven approach, cost-cutting, streamlining.
he finally ordered his own team to evaluate the rifle. And they, surprise, surprise, saw the M16's clear superiority, just like everyone else had.
McNamara was trying to impose common sense. He wanted a single rifle for all services, efficiency, and he forced the Ordnance Corps to finally procure a military version of the AR-15. But McNamara, focused purely on cost, made one pivotal error himself.
What was that?
He decided not to mandate a chromed chamber and bore. The original Armalite prototype, which used a different, cleaner type of powder, didn't have one, so he figured, hey, we can save a few bucks per rifle here. He cut it for cost savings, not realizing the disastrous implications down the line, especially with the changes the OC was about to make.
That cost-saving decision, though seemingly small, became an open door for the Ordnance Corps to guarantee failure when they were finally forced to buy the M16. When forced to purchase it in large numbers in 1963, the OC insisted on 3 mandated design changes that fundamentally crippled the rifle.
This is the essence of that banality of evil Fallows talked about. No one explicitly said, let's kill American soldiers. But the practical result of these 3 technical decisions, driven by professional slight, bureaucratic inertia, and financial interest, was precisely that. Death by memo, almost.
Let's detail these changes, because they're the 3 pillars of failure. First, the forward assist. What was that about?
Eugene Stoner, the designer, always argued the forward assist was entirely unnecessary. It's that little plunger button you see on the side of an M16 receiver. Ostensibly, its purpose was to let a soldier manually force the bolt closed if it didn't seat properly, maybe due to dirt.
Sounds like a good backup.
Not really. It added complexity and weight, but more importantly, it completely contradicted the rifle's core design philosophy and, frankly, common sense for dealing with jams.
Why is the forward assist so controversial then? Explain that contradiction.
Because if a rifle bolt won't go into battery, meaning it won't seat the round fully, it's usually because the chamber is fouled, dirty, or the casing itself is damaged or stuck. If you manually force that bolt closed using the assist, you're often just ramming the problem deeper.
Making it worse.
Exactly. You can cause a catastrophic jam where the extractor claw can no longer grab the rim of the round, or you drive carbon fouling deeper, making the weapon totally impossible to clear quickly in the heat of battle. It was a feature that encouraged the user to potentially break the gun when it was already struggling.
So the Ordnance Corps added a feature that actually maximized the chance of an irreparable failure when the weapon was dirty, which it was guaranteed to be in Vietnam's humid, dirty conditions.
Precisely. The second flaw was McNamara's cost-saving error compounded by the OC's obstinance. The lack of chrome plating in the chamber and bore. Since World War II in the Pacific, the Army and Marines had known that high humidity mandated chrome plating to prevent rust, corrosion, and especially powder fouling from sticking.
They knew this from experience.
Decades of experience. By omitting it, they guaranteed the unreliability of the weapon in the exact operating theater it was being sent to. It was practically designed to rust and foul up.
But the third change, this is the one that seems the most overtly destructive, the technical equivalent of an organizational poison pill. The insistence on using cheaper, recycled Olin Mathieson ball powder instead of the specific DuPont stick powder that Stoner designed the rifle around.
This was the killer. The OC initially claimed the ball powder offered a slightly greater range, but the real reason seems to be that it was simply a cheaper recycled propellant they already had in massive quantities for other ammunition, like the M14's 7.62mm. Switching powders would save money and simplify logistics for them.
Okay, so it was cheaper. What specifically was the mechanical problem with this new powder? You mentioned the cyclic rate earlier, but let's break down why that speed increase was so catastrophic for the M16.
Right. The original AR-15 was designed for DuPont IMR stick powder. This powder burns quickly and relatively cleanly, allowing the rifle's direct impingement gas system to operate smoothly at its designed rate, around 750 rounds per minute cyclic.
Okay.
The Olin ball powder, however, burned much more slowly and dirtier. That slower burn meant that when the gas impulse hit the system to cycle the weapon, the pressure remained higher for a longer duration.
Which means more force.
Which means the internal mechanism, the bolt carrier group, was being pushed backward much harder, faster, and sooner than it was ever engineered to handle. The cyclic rate of fire shot up dramatically, sometimes from the intended 750 RPM to well over 900, even close to 1,000 RPM.
Way too fast.
Way too fast. This insane increase caused critical timing issues. Specifically, the bolt would unlock and try to extract the spent cartridge prematurely before the internal chamber pressure from firing had dropped to a safe level.
And the consequence of pulling the case out too early under high pressure.
Catastrophic failure. The residual high pressure would effectively weld or fuse the hot brass casing to the unchromed steel chamber walls. When the bolt tried to violently rip this stuck casing out, the extractor claw, which is just a small metal hook, would simply tear the rim right off the base of the shell.
No.
Leaving the main body of the spent brass casing hopelessly fused inside the chamber. This instantly turned the rifle into, at best, a single-shot weapon that needed a cleaning rod rammed down the barrel to clear impossible in a firefight, or, more often, just a useless club.
The rifle was literally redesigned by the OC's mandated changes to destroy itself through excessive speed and guaranteed fouling from the dirty powder in the unchromed chamber. And the proof of this sabotage was immediate, wasn't it?
Absolutely. When Colt tested the modified M16A1 with the ball powder and no chrome lining, it proved 6 times as likely to jam as the earlier version that used the clean stick powder. 6 times.
That's a damning statistic.
Colt, who was contracting to build 40,000 rifles per month, was so alarmed by these force changes that they officially notified the Army they could no longer guarantee the M16A1's reliability in the field. But the Ordnance Corps, having forced the contract terms, simply ignored Colt's warnings and pushed the faulty rifles out the door to Vietnam.
They manufactured a failure, shipped it directly into a combat zone, and then prepared to place the blame entirely on the soldiers using it. That takes us to the crisis in Vietnam starting around 1966.
Yeah, as American troop numbers soared past 200,000, the M16A1 arrived in Vietnam, but often, incredibly, it came without cleaning kits or proper manuals.
No cleaning kits for a rifle prone to fouling.
It sounds unbelievable, but yes, this fed the most dangerous lie surrounding the rifle early on. The myth that the weapon was space-age, futuristic, and somehow self-cleaning, requiring little maintenance.
Where did that myth come from?
Partly from early Armalite marketing, maybe, but mostly it seems it was pushed by some training cadre, perhaps even repeated by the OC, maybe to downplay the issues they knew existed. Troops were sometimes encouraged to just fire a few rounds to get used to the feel, which, given the dirty powder and the lack of chrome plating, was essentially accelerating the weapon's self-destruction through fouling.
And the field failures were immediate and widespread. Soldiers were quickly figuring out desperate workarounds, like only loading 16 or 18 rounds into the 20-round magazine because they found the magazine springs were weak and could cause feeding issues if fully loaded. Another unacknowledged design flaw.
Right, another field fix for a problem that shouldn't have existed. But the fatal combination of Vietnam's intense humidity, the heavy fouling from the ball powder, and the lack of chrome lining guaranteed failure in the worst possible way.
Let's revisit Private McGarra's experience again. The live round, freezing in place overnight. Explain exactly how that sequence, humidity, powder, no chrome, led to the weapon being rendered useless.
Okay, so imagine the high humidity in Vietnam. It's everywhere. When the Olin ball powder burns, it leaves behind a residue that contains potassium chloride salts, which are hygroscopic. They attract and hold moisture.
Like salt on a humid day clumps together.
Exactly. This residue coats the inside of the hot chamber. Now, if a soldier left a live round chamber overnight in that humid environment, the salt residue absorbed moisture from the air, creating a kind of corrosive, sticky film inside the unchromed steel chamber. This film could essentially act like a weak adhesive, cementing the brass casing in place.
So the round gets stuck.
Right. When McGarra pulled the trigger, the round fired, the bullet went out, but the casing was stuck fast. The next part of the cycle is the extractor trying to pull the spent casing out. But the extractor claw isn't strong enough to overcome the fused brass, so it just rips the rim clean off the base of the cartridge,
leaving the body of the casing stuck firmly in the chamber. A jammed, useless rifle with possibly a broken extractor right in the middle of potential combat. That's horrifying. The soldier's testimony is what finally forced the truth out into the open, right? They couldn't ignore the voices from the field forever.
Absolutely. The reports pouring back from platoon leaders, from individual soldiers, were just devastating. We have a letter cited from a Marine officer in 1967 sent directly to Senator Gaylord Nelson. He reported that in crucial moments during firefights, as many as 60% of the rifles fail to operate.
60%. Think about that. Imagine being in a 40-man platoon under fire and knowing that potentially 24 of your buddies' rifles might just stop working at any second. The psychological impact alone.
It's terrifying. The letter went on to claim specific knowledge of at least 2 Marines who died within 10 feet of the enemy, discovered later with jammed rifles in their hands. This is where the banality of bureaucratic evil becomes absolutely visceral. These were young men dying because someone, somewhere up the chain, insisted on cheaper powder and wanted to protect a prior budget line item.
And there was another letter quoted, wasn't there? About finding soldiers.
Yes, another letter relayed the common, devastating scene found after battles. You know what killed most of us? Our own rifles, the M16. Practically every one of our dead in a recent battle was found with his rifle torn down next to him where he'd been trying to fix it.
Oh, man. The soldier stripped of his primary defensive tool, desperately trying to clear the jam, perform field maintenance, just to save his own life while under fire, only to be killed in the process.
It's a heartbreaking image.
And what was the Army's immediate, official, mulish response to these horrific reports coming back from the field? Did they admit fault? Did they rush fixes?
No, initially. Standard bureaucratic deflection. The public response was essentially, you soldiers just aren't cleaning your rifles properly. They blamed the user.
Blame the troops?
They literally hired the famous cartoonist Will Eisner, creator of the Spirit comic, to design and illustrate maintenance guides for PS, the Preventive Maintenance Monthly magazine, showing soldiers how to clean the M16. The implicit message was clear. The weapon is fine, the operator is deficient, it was insulting.
But Congress, fueled by letters like the ones you mentioned and mounting pressure, had finally heard enough. Democratic Congressman Richard Eichord of Missouri launched a formal investigation via the House Armed Services Committee. They demanded accountability for this incredibly high failure rate that was costing lives.
The Eichord Committee's 1967 report was, effectively, a public execution of the Ordnance Corps handling of the M16 program. It didn't mince words. It pointed the finger directly at the Army's insistence on using the all-in ball powder as the primary culprit.
What did it say about the powder?
It stated flatly that the Army's decision to switch powders against the advice of the rifle's designer and manufacturer, and its continued use despite the flood of failure reports, bordered on criminal negligence. That specific phrase, criminal negligence, appeared in the report. It was the ultimate necessary public shaming that finally validated what the soldiers in the field had been screaming about.
That congressional report was the lever needed to finally force change. Even though McNamara's initial cost-saving error on the chrome plating was identified as a significant contributing factor, especially with the dirty powder.
Right, the lack of chrome made the fouling problem much worse.
The primary catalyst identified for the catastrophic failures was the OC's mandated powder change, driving that excessive C-click rate and premature extraction.
The fixes finally came, pushed by the committee's findings, and they were, somewhat ironically, all things that Eugene Stoner had recommended from the very beginning, or things known to be necessary for jungle warfare.
Like what specifically?
Well, first, cleaning kits were finally issued universally to every soldier carrying the M16, along with proper training on how to use them frequently. Second, the next iteration of the M16 was manufactured with chromed bores and chambers, as it should have been all along. And third, the specifications for the powder were eventually changed back to something closer to the original, cleaner burning type.
And the result of these fixes?
The change in the field was immediate and total. Once, soldiers were properly equipped and trained to clean their rifles often, and with the clean powder finally approved for use, and the chrome bores addressing the humidity and fouling issue, the jams and failures virtually ceased.
Virtually ceased? That's incredible.
It was total vindication for Stoner and the original AR-15 design. The rifle itself, when built and supplied correctly, was sound, lightweight, and superior for the conditions. The years of death, frustration, and chaos were directly attributable to the specific modifications insisted upon by the Ordnance Corps, a body that prioritized institutional reputation and maybe cost savings over operational reality in soldiers' lives.
Now, we have spent a lot of time focusing on the M16's superiority and the M14's flaws in the assault rifle role. But we must acknowledge the counterpoint for balance. The M14 was not inherently a bad weapon, was it? Just perhaps ill-suited one for the specific demands of Vietnam jungle warfare and the modern infantry doctrine that the M16 embodied.
Absolutely, that's a fair point. The M14, as a rifle firing the 7.62mm NATO round in semi-automatic mode, was highly reliable and very powerful. We hear from a source, Wallace Lind, who was involved in field testing back at 5th Horde in 1965. Lind's platoon used the M14, made by Remington in their case, and they trained extensively with it.
What was his experience?
Lind specifically noted that during 6 months of intensive infantry AI training, which included practice firing 3-round bursts, their M14s never malfunctioned once. not once. It was a sturdy, dependable weapon in that context.
And he used it in combat.
Yes, Lind himself went on to use the M14 in Vietnam throughout 1966 and 1967 and stated unequivocally that he never had a problem with it, calling it a good weapon.
Okay, so what does this tell us?
It tells us a couple of important things. First, the M14 was indeed a reliable piece of machinery when properly maintained and used within its design parameters, especially in semi-auto. Second, the soldiers who favored it often did so because of its undeniable stopping power. That big 7.62 millimeter round gave them confidence, especially for shooting through the thicker jungle cover common in Vietnam, where the lighter 5.56 millimeter might be deflected more easily.
So the preference for the M14 among some veterans was certainly rooted in its proven reliability in semi-auto and its raw power, but that doesn't negate the M16's overwhelming advantages in terms of weight, the sheer amount of ammunition a soldier could carry 3 times as much, and, crucially, controllable automatic fire in close-quarters combat, which became increasingly important.
Exactly. The Ordnance Corps simply bet on the wrong horse for the specific demands of the Vietnam War and the evolving nature of infantry combat. And worse, they actively tried to cripple the right horse, the M16, in the process, only to begrudgingly fix it years later when forced to by Congress after soldiers had already paid the price.
So wrapping this up, what does this entire tragic, infuriating episode, the M16 saga, mean for you, the listener, beyond just the history of military hardware? What's the takeaway?
I think it synthesizes that core conflict that exists in almost every large institution, military or civilian. The constant battle between bureaucratic inertia, organizational pride, that $500 million refusal to admit failure with the M14, and the fundamental necessity of providing effective equipment and tools to the people on the front lines who actually need them most.
It's a textbook example of the sunk cost fallacy taken to a truly lethal extreme. The Ordnance Corps leadership simply could not tolerate the idea that their traditional, powerful, expensive rifle was a mistake for the current conflict and that technical innovation from outside their own halls had surpassed them. Their job security, their professional pride, it almost demanded the suppression or even destruction of the superior alternative.
And the lingering question, the most tragic one, remains the human cost. The source material states unequivocally that the actual number of American soldiers killed by enemy fire as a direct result of their M16s failing at a critical moment, that number will never be known.
Why not?
Because the Army did not keep specific records of casualties directly attributed to weapon malfunction, and frankly had no desire to do so. Admitting the scale would have been admitting culpability.
The refusal to even document the failures, the choice to effectively bury the evidence of how many died because of these decisions, is perhaps the final act of this whole systemic failure. They not only jeopardized lives, but erased the true measure of their negligence from the official record.
Indeed. The entire story is, as the source materials reflect, a deeply sad commentary to how a hidebound organization could subvert logic and reason merely because they refused to admit they were wrong. It's a cautionary tale.
It really forces you to reflect on the deeper meaning of this kind of institutional failure. When you look at the calculated sabotage, the rigged tests, the deliberate use of the wrong, corrosive ball powder, the ignoring of warnings, the resulting deaths, this isn't just history. It's a powerful, enduring lesson in the staggering cost of professional hubris. And what happens when the hard truth of a battlefield is sacrificed for the sake of internal organizational politics and stability?
It really raises that fundamental question. In any large bureaucracy, military, government, corporate, where do the objective technical facts end and the political or financial expediency begin? And who, ultimately, should be held accountable when that line is crossed, especially when human lives are the currency being spent?
So here's something to mull over or explore on your own that builds on this deep dive. Consider the modern parallels. Are there current examples you can think of where institutions, public or private, seem to be clinging to an expensive, outdated solution, maybe a technology or a policy, while actively suppressing or ignoring a technically superior, perhaps disruptive, but professionally inconvenient alternative? The M16 scandal proves that this pattern of resistance to change, even lethal resistance, isn't just a one-off historical incident. It's a recurring theme in human organizations.
A powerful thought to leave you with. Thank you for joining us for the deep dive.